we want to understand what our vulnerability stance actually looks like. What kind of risk are we taking by leaving devices out there? One of the other really nice things that we like about this software and other software suites like it is the available to track software vulnerabilities. And this is something that becomes really important, especially when we're talking about older and legacy systems. Now, I figured I'd throw this up here. This is a chart that came from a group called Noetic Cyber. And Noetic does vulnerability management and tracking and a bunch of other really useful activities for organizations around the world. And they've been nice enough to share some of their findings. What they're showcasing here is the number of CVEs, so software exploits, that are being released on a yearly basis. And we can see this nice upward curve forming. We're seeing more and more of these released every year. In fact, in 2023, there were over 29,000 software vulnerabilities that were registered and named, given an actual CVE, released for, basically for public consumption. If you're running a system that's vulnerable to one of these exploits, you're putting yourself at a pretty significant amount of risk just by virtue of having that device inside of your infrastructure. Now, researchers aren't the only ones who look at software vulnerabilities. Hackers tend to go after these as well. I mean, we've seen tons and tons of headlines recently about attackers going after things like zero-day exploits, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Old vulnerable software, things like Log4j and the Exchange proxy shell vulnerabilities are all still, somewhat prevalent when we talk about network security. But this gets built into attacker toolkits automatically. This is a headline that came from Bleeping Computer recently. There is a new piece of malware that's been identified called Raspberry Robin. And this has evolved to actually include Windows exploits as a base feature of the malware itself. And it does this with oftentimes either early or very rapid access to vulnerabilities. When we talk about vulnerabilities and how frequently or how quickly attackers will start to utilize them, I mean, oftentimes once we have public disclosure of something like a remote code execution vulnerability or something like that, we don't get more than about 15 minutes before attackers will likely start integrating that into their toolkits. I mean, it's a very, very rapid process. And it brings up kind of one of the primary elements that we want to talk about here in terms of mapping out your attack surface, and that's going to be that external vulnerability scan. Now, normally this is going to be an automated process. You're going to want to have a piece of software to do this for you, because going through and doing this manually would be a nightmare. But what we want to do is review and evaluate any internet-facing software or hardware that we have. We want to understand what it's running, what it's vulnerable to, and how we can go about shoring up our security on that one. We also, if we're using software to do this, want a tool available that's going to give us a good comprehensive report, something that we can pass off to other members of our organization, that we can use for tracking of vulnerability management, and a lot more. If you're running into issues with either the availability of scanning software like this, or you just don't think your team has the expertise or time to pull it off, consider a trusted third party. There are multiple organizations out there that will do these scans for you and provide you with reporting. It can be invaluable, and they oftentimes are a pretty inexpensive service. They're very, very economical, and it's, again, a big hit when it comes to your overall security platform. When we talk about this, one of the things we want to point out is the defense against it. And oftentimes, again, this comes down to scanning solutions. Now, we're showcasing Tenable throughout the webinar today, but there are multiple other options available that either are paid services, subscription services, or open source solutions that, with the correct knowledge and the correct infrastructure, you could run for little or no cost. Again, we've talked about Tenable One. Tom talked about Nessus as one of the scanners that we use, which is another Tenable product. We also see things like Qualys, we see Nexpose, and then we see Nuclei. All right, so to give you an example of what this looks like, we want to show how we can map out now the rest of our attack surface. And this is what the internal network is going to give back to us. When we're mapping out these services, we want to make sure that we're scanning very, very frequently. There used to be kind of a sentiment that monthly vulnerability scanning was kind of the way to go. And unfortunately for us, monthly is not quite enough at this point. We see software vulnerabilities and exploits being released way too quickly for a monthly scan to be able to effectively catch things. So we recommend actually doing a daily scan of your network. And with a lot of these tools, this can be programmed ahead of time, and it can deliver, again, a very nicely formatted report that will show you things like basically your risk. How many devices were identified with vulnerabilities? How critical were those vulnerabilities? And what is going to be able to exploit those? Having this nice dashboard makes it very, very easy to use. It's all at a glance. It's all contained on a single page, and you can drill down farther if you want to. But especially from like a risk management standpoint, just seeing from a 10,000 foot view what your risk level looks like, just based on a simple scan that can be repeated daily, can be very, very helpful in developing things like your response remediation, incident response policies, and your general cybersecurity framework.
Thank you so much, everyone. Again, my name is Matt Duran, Director of Training and Research for LMG Security. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at any time. We would love to hear from you. You can reach me at info@lmgsecurity.com, find me on LinkedIn, or follow us on Twitter. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.